Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Show Me the Money. Why don't we define
legal-
what it is for
Yep.
all the people out in the universe?
Mhm.
When I think of chain of title, I think about chain of title as the set of various documents that establish ownership of a film.
Mhm.
And it could be various types of agreements, right? A writer agreement with the writer who you hired to write a script, an option purchase agreement whereby you acquire an option to in turn acquire the film.
You got to
TV
stop
rights.
there, John. You're going too fast for whoever's watching this one. You just said option. What is that?
Why don't you tell us?
Okay, well, like we said, film is an idea, right?
Yeah.
When you look at it, okay, the concept, an idea, that's not something that's protectable. Okay, it's something that it essentially is available to anyone. If you look at Titanic, it's the same thing almost as Romeo and Juliet. Love story and tragedy and so forth, right? So when we start with the script itself, someone writes a script. The script is about 110 pages long or something, right? Probably
The general rule is 1 page per minute.
1 page
right?
per minute. So if I have a 120-minute film, I'm going to be writing 120 pages of a script. That takes a long time. Someone's going to have to get paid if they're going to do it, right? So there are these unions that say that if you are a union member, you need to pay a certain amount of money to get a script written. So I'm starting as a filmmaker, okay? I don't have the money, right? I usually have maybe $5,000, $10,000. I have a credit card that maybe line or something. What I can do is I can, instead of buying the film, okay, I tell the writer, listen, give me the right to be able to make a film out of your script. And I just want to reserve that, okay? Because that's really, if I don't have the ability to reserve this script, how else am I going to finance it and get the money for it? I'd have to have a lot of money already, buy it, and I don't know if I'm going to make the film. So what they tend to do is they negotiate what is called an option. The option grants the producer, a budding producer or an existing producer, the exclusive right, okay, to take that script that was written by that writer and turn it into a film. You usually buy that for about a year, then you may renew it for another year. So that's essentially what you were saying when you had the word option itself. That is part of chain of title. Chain means that you take from the person who created the concept, treatment, story, script, to the person who actually puts it on a screen somewhere. That's your entire chain. And each person along that chain has to have a contract for it, which gives them the right to do so.
Exactly.
Yeah. And the option was sort of often the way the independent industry works.
And I think one very important thing that, Sam, you scraped the surface of is that ideas are not protected by copyright. And I think there's a huge misconception out there amongst certainly, first time or beginning filmmakers that I have this great idea, and their idea is very often an awesome idea. Unfortunately, it's not something that copyright protects. And that's something called the idea expression dichotomy. Copyright does not protect ideas, but it does protect expressions of ideas. Somebody has to sit down and fix an idea in a tangible medium. And when you actually think about it from a policy perspective, like, why do we have this rule? It goes back to labor theory. It goes back to this theory called sweat of the brow, which is intrinsic to copyright, which basically says, I need to toil. I need to sweat a little bit. I need to do some work to actually gain protection of copyright law. Just thinking up an idea, yeah, it does require some talent. You need to have creativity, but you need to do a little bit more than that. And there's a quote, I think, in a U.S. judgment that says, ideas are free as air. So we have the trope of Romeo and Juliet, two star-crossed lovers lose their lives. Titanic, which is two star-crossed lovers meet in a disaster scenario. Those are ideas that you can freely use in different scenarios. What you can't do is take an entire script, which basically encapsulates that idea, and just reproduce it as your own. That script is copyrightable expression. And the other interesting thing...
It doesn't have to get to a full script.
No, absolutely
not. In
not.
other words, what we hear often is there's the idea, and then there's something called a concept, right?
Mm-hmm.
And from the concept, it ends up being a synopsis sometimes. From a synopsis, it becomes a treatment, right? And then from the treatment, you end up doing an outline. And then possibly from that outline, it turns into a first draft of a script.
There's actually something in between there called a scriptment.
Okay, a script what?
A scriptment. It's a treatment with script aspects to it. It's the in between a treatment and a script.
Well, the treatment doesn't have the dialogue, right? And
exactly.
The script has the dialogue.
Exactly.
So you're saying that's in between. You get a little bit of dialogue and you get a little bit of okay.
Exactly.
And
the other thing,
the person who actually writes it is the one that gets the protection, right? Because sometimes what we've also had is people say, I collaborated with these people. I gave them all my ideas, and they wrote it down, and they wrote the script.
Yeah, and why don't we talk about one other misconception about copyright? And I get asked this question many, many times per year, which is, I wrote this script. How do I get copyright protection? How do I get a copyright? And very often I'm asked, do I register this thing? Do I take some other step?
Do I mail it to myself?
Do I mail it to myself, which is referred to as poor man's copyright, colloquially? So the answer to that is actually copyright subsists in a work the second you create it. Actually, as you create the work, you are creating copyrightable expression, where registration comes in, which in Canada is registration of the work at the Canadian Intellectual Property Office, or CIPO, CIPO, is that it serves an evidentiary component, right?
Well, it's evidence, but it also gives you, when you think about it, what I call a presumption of ownership, right? So, as a scriptwriter, definitely document your manuscript that you've written, okay? And mail it to yourself if you want to, maybe the cost of the stamp is now more, okay? Which then proves a date, because what you're looking at is two elements, right? Who created it and when it was created. If you look at copyright registration, what it ends up doing is it creates that date also, right? Because the moment you've registered it, you're stating, I've created it at this date itself. The other thing it gives you is, under copyright law, you create that presumption that you're the owner. And that presumption can help you if you're ever in litigation, because even though somebody can say, hey, I ended up, writing something, but I didn't register it, and I wrote the same thing, but I registered it, I have a presumption that I'm the owner of that work.
Exactly. Yeah. And so chain of title, a series of documents, an option, a writer agreement, various other types of agreements that establish ownership. But what you just mentioned, I think, is, again, a good segue. You're talking about people kind of not happy with each other, right? Staking a claim into the same property. And that's a great opportunity to talk about, why is it important to have chain of title, right? Because we've lived scenarios, or we've all heard of scenarios. I'll give the classic example that exists in Hollywood legend and lore, right? And it's the napkin deal. And napkin deal isn't a deal saying, okay, we're going to manufacture napkins. It has nothing to do with a napkin. It is actually derived from the fact that probably at some point, someone was sitting at some deli in Beverly Hills with some other person in the film industry. They wanted to make a deal. They had a napkin in front of them because they were at a deli, and they wrote some key points on the napkin.
Somebody had to have a pen too, right?
Exactly. Here's a pen.
Here's a pen, yeah.
So, and they have this napkin. One of them keeps it, and they start developing this film more and more, right? And they go down the rabbit hole. And essentially what all these rights rest on are a literal napkin.
Yeah. Well, the most the most memorable napkin deal that was done, I think, ended up creating one of the most popular Canadian films ever. That's Bon Cop, Bad Cop. Bon Cop, Bad Cop, I participated in as a lawyer for the producer, the original producer now who passed away. But Bon Cop, Bad Cop was actually an idea of the writer and the main actor, Patrick Huard. And they were at a restaurant. They were literally talking to each other about this, concept that they had. And Patrick had I don't know what the stage of it was at that time, but on literally their menu, okay, he wrote out that option and that right that he had, okay, and they signed that document and it became the foundation of the original Bon Cop, Bad Cop.
Well, why don't we talk about why people, or we can speculate, right? And I have a few theories. Why very often filmmakers have inadequate chain of title, right? And where inadequate chain of title comes back potentially to haunt you, and you and I frequently have to fix chain of title way too late in the game, or way later than is ideal. So why do people not place emphasis on the front end? In my view, it's one, they just don't really understand why they need such extensive documentation, which is, they're first-time filmmakers, really talented, but it's their first rodeo, right? So they've never been asked by a distributor, hey guys, can you please produce all the chain of title documentation, which we're going to have our lawyers go over word for word? The other thing is just exigencies of production, right? If I'm a creative person, my view is I don't need to get bogged down in the legalese. There's more pressing things like getting this movie made, getting an actor, dealing with a conflict on set, getting this thing written.
Or
I'll deal with
financed.
It's the quintessential punting of responsibilities towards later in the game. And where you and I are very often brought in is, can you please look at our chain of title and let us know whether we're missing something? Very often we do say, look, you are missing something. We can probably fix this. And typically we do. But
sometimes at a greater cost than what it would have been had they done it the first time.
Exactly. And in my view, the best thing to do if I were making a film would be to have a tightly locked up chain of title out the gate, right? But very often, like you're hinting at, there is a cost sensitivity, which is, I don't even know if this film is going to get made. So why am I going to spend all this time and money getting a proper chain of title? I could do it later in the game. The reality is, once you've signed something or once you've made a film and you don't have the documentation from a party, it winds up being far costlier than it would be in the first place.
Then you have the money. At the beginning, you didn't have the money, which now sort of reinforces why it's going to continue to happen, despite the fact that anybody watching this podcast should ask themselves that question. Okay, if I want to start in this business, I should get a strong chain of title. I should get my contracts reviewed by lawyers and possibly file copyright registrations, but then I don't do it anyway.
Yeah. And this is so much of what we do, right?
Well, it's where we see the problems, actually. It's because it wasn't founded on it's originally strong, okay? It'll end up later on coming back to, potentially haunt you.
Yeah. So what's next?
Well, I mean, the some of the aspects of chain deal with who owns what and this concept idea and so forth, right? So one of the other things in our Canadian film history was that there was an author who had a concept dealing with the story of Robinson Crusoe, and he was over in probably the Cannes Film Festival at the time. He meets with a production company that was known as CNR. Okay, CNR is no longer around, but for other reasons.
Just a side note, CNR. I know CNR because growing up in the '90s in Canada, they produced some of the most awesome kids content out there.
Yeah. CNR is the one behind what's that? And now I can't remember the famous Arthur. No. Was it? No, it wasn't Arthur.
I think they did. Let's pull this up. Maybe they did.
Sinar.
I think they did the show Are You Afraid of the Dark?
Yes, they actually did that,
which was
also
amazing. My sister and I used to watch that up north over the summers, and it was so scary to a little kid, but so awesome. Let's see what
It's
they
called the
did.
Cookie Jar Group now.
Yeah.
1976 is Sinar. What were the shows?
Yeah, what do we have? Maybe go all the way down. They usually have a filmography.
Oh, they don't do it on this one.
Huh.
IMDb. No.
Oh. Anyway.
There was their whole issue. As a company, they went public. They were worth $150 million. Then later on, what ends up happening is there was this scandal because of the fact that they were rewriting scripts or putting the names of Canadian authors on scripts to produce them because of the fact that you had to have this point system, as we just mentioned, and so forth. But one of the things that also made Sinar, look, Arthur is part of it. Zuba Mufumu Caillou. Caillou was the big one from the Canadian side.
Caillou was huge.
Yeah. Are You Afraid of the Dark? The Busy World of Richard Scarry. Madeleine. The Real Story of Happy Birthday to You. The Avengers Paddington Bear. So they did all of that. Yeah. But in the Robinson Crusoe one, they met with this guy named Robinson. He gave them a whole sort of workout, like a whole Bible, what you call it, of a series. Okay. Now, Bible may need to be explained what that is. Okay. It's the whole characters and the whole story plots behind the television series.
Well, that's it. So when you create a show, it's very different than when you create a movie, because a movie is a distinct universe, right? It's 2 hours, and not getting into whether there's going to be a sequel or not. If there isn't a sequel, that's where it ends. A series, if it's successful, potentially runs 9, 10 seasons. If you're The Simpsons, which is literally started the year I was born, you run 30 years. Yeah. So the Bible establishes locations, characters, what they want, how old they are, what some of the stories they're going to deal with. It's basically the Bible for the universe that you're creating.
Yeah, that's it. So anyway, so he presents the Bible to this producer, and one of them being Sinar, and they end up doing, later on, maybe a year or two later, a similar television series. Okay, called Robinson Sucroe. Okay, so they reversed a little bit, and I don't know how much they ended up changing, but he takes a lawsuit against them, saying they infringed his copyright, even though they didn't sign anything with him. Okay, even though there was substantive differences, and in first court they find that there was a copyright infringement because he was able to prove that he did give them the original Bible based on his, and that the second component was that there were so many similarities between these two series, okay, a modern day Robinson Crusoe, okay, that it could not be anything other than a copy. And he wins a $5 million award in Canada, the largest, I think, copyright infringement award that was granted. So that shows you of how it is possible, okay, and why having all these rights and being paranoid sometimes about this whole thing of chain of title leads you to really do that homework.
Exactly. So why don't we talk about things that you and I often do to ensure that a script or a TV show is not offsides? Obviously, we talk about vetting chain of title very often, coming in to rewrite or amend and restate parts of chain of title. But the other portion is E&O. Why don't we talk about a bit about E&O, or errors and omissions?
The Errors and Omissions insurance company came in to defend the Sinar company. So what ends up happening, errors and omissions is an insurance, just like if you insure your house, right, for fire. It's an insurance policy that you get in the event that you didn't do your homework enough where someone comes out of the woodwork and says, hey, you stole my script. Because as a producer, just think about it. Somebody gave you a script. How do you know they wrote the script? This is not like buying a home where you go in and you check the address and the lot number and you see who owns it and you can follow who was the prior owner. So that's your chain of title for real estate. Here, your chain of title when it's dealing with a film is a series of contracts that are not registered anywhere. So that the person who ends up reaching your doorstep, all those documents, how do you know they were all the correct documents, that someone was paid or not paid, and maybe they don't have a receipt and so forth? So you get the errors and omissions insurance, you produce the picture or the series or the film, and if someone comes out of the woodwork, well, that insurer will then defend you. So that's another way of, call it, doing your homework. And it requires, the moment that you do the E&O, they ask lawyers to come in and review it, right?
Exactly. But to take one step back, I think it's important to talk about, just very quickly, where insurance comes in general, right? E&O is not generally, or anytime that I've seen, an opt-in thing that a producer may do or may not do. Distributors, financiers, who we're going to talk about later, they require
broadcasters,
producers to get all sorts of insurance. One of them is errors and omissions. The other is just like commercial general liability, which just covers you for all sorts of potential damages. But errors and omissions, what it does is it, and you could jump in here too, it protects you against, lapses in copyright, defamation, privacy infringement, things like that. Things that, you see on screen that might be objected to.
Yeah, but then we're asked to review those, right? And we have to make decisions on those. So there's a creative expression that the writer has, that the film producer has. All of that then gets looked at by an insurance eye, right? So it's interesting because that means that a movie, in a way, goes through almost like a censorship type situation. And I can give you the same example that I gave before on that Napkin deal. Bone Cop, Bad Cop was actually written with everybody's real names. Because in the film Bone Cop, Bad Cop, all the names are changed, right? And you see this often, right? The names of these people are all fictitious and the characters are not based on anything real, right? So that they are protecting themselves. Technically, that's because there was an E&O insurer or a lawyer from an E&O insurer who said, I don't want you to use that person's real name. I don't want you to use the real situation and create something fictitious so that they don't have a claim from them.
Exactly. And that's
but Patrick Huard, when he actually wrote the script, actually was using people's real names in there.
Exactly. And that's one of the things that producers do when they're going through E&O, right?
Yeah.
They'll order a bunch of searches that you and I will review. One of them is a title search. The other is just a general script search. And they literally tell you they go over everyone's name from the script. And they say, okay, in the phone book or on 411.ca or .com, this is how many people with the same name we've found. And the general rule applied by a bunch of studios, it's very firm. It's, if there's no one with that name, you're good.
Yeah.
If there's one or two and the character is a good person, you still can't use it. If there's three or more, you can use it. If the character is nefarious, if they're a villain, you need 5 or more to be able to use it. And then there's all
Those are like American rules.
And then there's all sorts of considerations. It's like, okay, is the character in New York State? Is your character in New York State? It really does get that granular.
Yeah. Well, we had one situation where we were clearing a script. It was a Russian officer, army officer. And we had to phone the Russian army, okay, to see if there was a person called,
I've had a similar scenario with
Igor
the police.
Pavlov or something, right? In their army corps, right? So we phoned the office or whatever it was, and the person says, "Well, why are you asking me this question?" Right? Says, "Well, because this person appears in a Hollywood film. He's a main character. He's one of the characters who's told His name is Igor. And we want to make sure there's no Igor, real Igor, because he could sue them. He says, well, why would Igor sue you? He says he would be very happy if his name and character appeared in a Hollywood film. Completely different attitude.
And you know what they say?
them.
You know what they say? Only in Hollywood, right?
That's it. You got it.
So
we're now, I guess, at the stage where we've been able to get our script. We've got our all of our rights together. We got ourselves some clearances and so forth. So we're going to end up start going into the next stages of this thing. And I think this is what we're going to do now in the upcoming, episodes of our own podcast on our side. So I think we've covered pretty much this first grounding, hopefully, from all of our discussions. Everyone who's maybe listening or still listening at this time has a good idea of what they need just to get that foot into the ground and to take those first steps.
Exactly. And the next question is, how do we develop this thing? How do we make it?
Well, where do we make it? You have to stay tuned in to find out, because that's a big question also.
Exactly. Thanks so much for listening, everyone.
Well, thank you.
Speak
Thank you, John, also for guiding us along the way. And then we'll hopefully have more people join as this journey continues.
Thank you.
Thanks.